Hi, I'm Melissa, the Ooster Free Library Book Bite series. Really excited to bring you one of the best kidlit characters ever, Nancy Drew. This is from the Clue Book series. It's called The Big Island Burglary by Carolyn Keene. It was illustrated by Peter Francis and published by Aladdin. I picked it because it's one of her more recent adventures. It takes us to an exciting, warm place during our winter, and you can get it both here at the library, check out this copy, or as a free ebook from our Cloud Library ebook app that you download from oosterhout.info. So this version of Nancy, that are about 12 years old, and she is, as always, is with her best friends, Bess, and Bess's cousin, George. In this case, George is a girl. Chapter 1, The Marvelous Mantis. Nancy Drew and Bess Marvin peered over the side of the boat. The water was so dark they couldn't see anything below the surface. Bess clutched her life vest and stared at Nancy. "Do you think they're sharks?" she asked nervously. "Of course they're sharks. It's Hawaii," George Fang called out behind them. She leaned back in her seat and shrugged. "Stop scaring your cousin," Mr. Fane said. "We're all going to be just fine. You don't think I brought you out here to get eaten?" Nancy looked off in the distance. Up ahead, a few other boats had anchored in a cove, and a bunch of people had jumped into the water. They were all wearing life vests and snorkel masks. As soon as she saw them, Nancy wasn't worried. Some of the kids in the groups looked like they were only 6 or 7. They were smiling and laughing. They didn't seem nervous about getting into the ocean at night. "What do manta rays look like?" George asked their boat's captain. "Are they gray like stingrays?" Captain Tane shook his head. "They're black and white. They have spots on their bellies and huge mouths. That's how they eat the plankton." "What's plankton?" Nancy asked. She'd heard that word before, but realized she didn't really know what it meant. "Plankton is what a lot of big fish feed on," Captain Tane said, scratching his goatee as he steered the boat. He was a round man with thick black hair. "It's lots of tiny sea creatures, eggs and little crustaceans. They're so small you can't see them." "Can the manta rays' tails hurt us? Are they sharp?" Bess asked. She was still staring into the water, looking worried. "Nah, they don't have barbs or stingers. The mantas are gentle creatures," Captain Tane said. "They're called the butterflies of the sea. I think you're going to love them." "I think you will too. I'll show you when we're done reading." That seemed to make Bess feel better. Ku, the first mate, passed her a pair of flippers, and she sat down on the bench to put them on. Soon their boat was gliding into a cove to join the others. Nancy had only been snorkeling once before with her dad. When George's parents invited her on their vacation to Hawaii, she knew it would be the first for a lot of things. From the moment they stepped off the plane, it had been non-stop fun. They were staying on the Big Island, which was, just like its name, the biggest island in the Hawaiian island chain. And there was so much to do and see. On Sunday, they'd taken surfing lessons. Nancy had even managed to get up on the board and surf a tiny wave all the way to the shore. Then Mrs. Fane had taken them on a long hike through the jungle. It was so green and beautiful, Nancy felt like she was walking through a movie set. Tomorrow they were going to a luau, which was a special Hawaiian feast. That night, Mrs. Fane and Scotty, George's 3-year-old brother, had stayed back at the hotel. Scotty was way too young to swim with manta rays, and Mrs. Fane seemed to be happy to have an excuse not to go. Nancy wondered if she was as nervous as they were about getting into the water at night. "What are those for?" Mr. Fane asked. As they got closer, they could see that each group had a guide and a surfboard covered in blue lights. The water in the cave was glowing. "Blue lights attract plankton," Ku said. "The manta rays will swim up for a snack. You just have to hold on to the board. Then you watch and wait." "Everyone ready?" the captain asked. He parked the boat beside the others. George was still fiddling with her snorkel, and her dad had to adjust the strap for her. "Ready as I'll always ever be," she said, her voice muffled by the mask. Ku climbed down the ladder at the back of the boat and plunged into the water. He was short and muscular, and was such a good swimmer he didn't need a life vest. He pulled the surfboard down with him and turned on the blue lights. "This is going to be great, girls," Mr. Fane said as he jumped in beside Ku. He grabbed the surfboard, which had handles along the sides. They waited for Nancy and her friends to follow. "Eee!" Bess let out a squeal as she jumped in. Nancy and George climbed down the ladder and swam out to the surfboard. The water wasn't as cold as Nancy thought it would be. All around them, people floated onto their bellies, their masks in the water as they waited for the manta rays. "Hold on with both hands, just like this," Ku said, as he grabbed two handles on the side of the board. He kicked his legs and lay flat. Nancy and Bess went onto one side of the surfboard, and George and her dad went on the other. They stared into the water below. Nancy could hear each of her breaths through the snorkel. They waited and waited. Nancy started to get a little cold and suddenly wished she'd worn the wetsuit Ku had offered her. All around them, other groups clustered around their surfboards. Just when Nancy was sure nothing was going to happen, she saw someone swimming towards them. "Ah!" Bess yelled through her snorkel. As the creature got closer, Nancy saw its huge, gaping mouth. It was like a giant stingray. Its mouth was so big it looked like it could swallow Nancy whole. Nancy raised her head from the water, suddenly nervous. George and her dad were both still floating on their stomachs and watching the manta. She put her head back down so she wouldn't miss anything. The creature swam closer and closer, and Nancy's stomach twisted into knots. It was so huge and coming right toward her. When it was a few feet away, it dipped down under them and did a backflip. Its belly was covered with dozens of black spots. Nancy could see into its gills as it flipped around and around again, taking another huge mouthful of plankton. A second manta ray swam up next to it and started doing the same thing. She understood now why people called them the butterflies of the ocean. They were so graceful. With all their flipping, it seemed like the manta rays were dancing together. The group kept watching for almost an hour. When the first manta rays swam off, new ones swam over, feeding on the plankton beneath the board. Every minute was better than the last. Ku and Captain Tane had to call Nancy and Bess several times before they picked their masks up out of the water. "That was incredible," Bess said. "Amazing," Nancy agreed. As they swam back to the boat, Nancy couldn't stop smiling. Chapter 2, Hula the Night Away. "Aloha," a woman in a colorful straw skirt said. She hung a flower garland around Nancy's neck. "Come in, welcome." "Mahalo," Nancy replied. Just that morning she'd learned the Hawaiian word for thank you. She'd used it after she bought a coconut on the beach, and when Bess helped her take her snorkel off. George looked around the patio, which was lit by tiki torches. "It's magical." A few of the women who worked at Sunrise Resort were now wearing hula skirts and huge leafy green lace around their necks. On stage, 3 men were playing giant drums as another man spun fire on a string. When the fireball moved through the air, it created different shapes, circles and figure eights. It was one of the coolest things Nancy had ever seen. "Do you believe this dinner?" Mrs. Fane added, handing platters to each of the girls. "I don't think I've ever seen a roast pig before." They walked down along the long buffet table. A whole pig had been roasted on a spit and was now sitting there with an apple in its mouth. A woman with a short black bob carved steaks off a giant white fish, and there were piles and piles of brightly colored fruits. There was probably enough pineapple to last a year. "Whoa, what's that?" Nancy asked, staring at what looked like a bowl of purple mashed potatoes. "This is poi," a skinny, shaggy-haired man behind the table explained. His name tag said Ted. "It's made out of taro root. Want to try some?" Nancy and Bess both held their plates up, and Ted scooped some onto each. The girls liked the idea of eating something new, especially pretty purple food. When would they get the chance to do that again? Nancy loaded her plate with poke, a traditional Hawaiian dish made up of raw fish, soy sauce, salt, and onions. She even took a few slices of roast pig, but she had to look away when she served herself. She kept thinking the pig was staring at her. When they found their table, it was right in the front row. Mr. Fane and Scotty had come down to the luau a little early to find a spot. Mrs. Fane frowned when she saw Scotty's plate. It was just one big pile of strawberries. He refused to eat anything else, Mr. Frayne laughed. George rolled her eyes. Scotty's going to turn into a giant strawberry. Am not, Scotty whined, then popped another berry into his mouth. You're definitely going to get seconds, Mrs. Frayne said, sitting down beside him. But look at this view. Lucky us. I can feel the heat, George said, holding up her hands. The dancer swung the fireball around and around just a few yards away. A bald man in a flowered shirt sat at the next table snapping dozens of pictures. He aimed his giant camera at his two teenage kids, then at his red-headed wife, then at the man spitting fire. It seemed like he was trying to capture every single second of the show. Dad, stop it, the teenage girl said, holding up her hands to block the camera. She had long brown hair and freckles and wore purple high-top sneakers. Her brother was a foot taller than her. His black faux hawk was gelled into place. And now for what's sure to be your favorite part of the evening, the MC announced, the Hula Show. Can we have a few volunteers come up here to help us out? Bess's hand shot up. She was more excited than she'd been all day. Yes, the young lady in the front. The MC was wearing a teal suit and tie. He pointed to Bess. Would your friends like to join us? Nancy and George shook their heads. The luau was packed. There must have been 200 people there. Nancy was getting stage fright just thinking about standing up in front of everyone. Come on, please, Bess begged. She grabbed Nancy's arm. I can't go up there alone. Would you go up with your friends to learn the hula in front of the whole group? Well, we'll see what Nancy does next time on Book Bites. These pictures show the types of manta watching snorkeling trips that Nancy and her friends went on, and also some of the food that they enjoyed at the Hawaiian luau. See you next time on Book Bites.